Jason, action points, item paper 6.1.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So the purpose of this report is really to go through prior requests from the committee in terms of items that staff were to go away and work on. So it's critical that we do close some of these out. In terms of item 3, the interest register is now published on the TDC website and it's available for public viewing. So officer recommendation to close that. Item 4 had a discussion around comply with in terms of how we use it. We've currently got comply with out across the organisation at the moment, and we're going to be reporting those back to the September meeting.
I recommend we can close that too. We'll close it as well.
Health and safety performance report. We're currently using an Assura upgrade in terms of quality of information around health and safety space. We'll talk about it more in the health and safety report later in the agenda. We're completing that by 31 July, so I propose that we keep that one open for now. There was item 6, a request from the committee that the capital spend project management audit is important and brought forward. I have attached the draft terms of reference to the internal audit work program update, and Deloitte will be undertaking this audit. So it's up to the committee whether we open or close that one. The fraud and corruption gap analysis, we've got an update report on this agenda in terms of update and progress, so I recommend we close that. Item 8, the committee had asked that we brought the sensitive expenditure policy brought back to the committee. This has now been renamed the financial expenditure procedures and is included as attachment to the sensitive expenditure update. So I recommend we close that. Audit and Risk Committee asked Audit New Zealand to provide the 22-23 audit plan. So that's come through. That includes the audit engagement letter and the audit proposal letter. That's on the agenda later to have a discussion around. The internal audit program, there are 3 things that were two things, that the onboarding induction process and exit process be reported back. That's an attachment to the report. And there was a request that the internal audit program include internal audits that we've completed in the last 2 years, just so the committee can see what we've done previously. So we've got that on the agenda. And the standing recommendations register, we've included the information management policy that SLT has approved. That's on the agenda. We now show when we've closed an item, and we did close 29 items this period. They're all included at the bottom of the outstanding recommendation register for one cycle, and we also show the date now of the actual audit. Mostly. Oh, okay. So may not have done them all, but thank you.
So that looks to me like number 5 is the only one that's left open at this stage, and it's more a matter of process. Otherwise, I think we can treat the rest as closed, unless anybody else wants to suggest something different. So look, I'll move from the chair that we receive the report. Do I have a seconder, please? Yes, thank you, Peter. Any questions or comments? Being none, I'll put all those in favour, please say aye. Aye. Those against, it's carried. Thanks for that. Jason, it's always good to be up to date with that. Right. John, we have our guests online, do we? Are we going to go, or do I move on to something different? You're going to be with us at 9:30? Yes. Oh, brilliant. Okay, well, let's move on to Jason. Don't go away. The committee program. We'll just keep working through until 9:30 when those folk can join us. So we can move on to item 6.3, which is the work program.
Yeah, so this is really for the committee's information in terms of reports and work that is coming up in front of them. The key points to note from my perspective in terms of standing agenda items, all of those items are on this agenda. In terms of other agenda items, I'll just draw the committee's attention to the insurance renewal. It was planned that we would be endorsing at this meeting, however the insurance has to be approved by 30 June. So having the ARC meeting just after 30 June is just, the timing didn't quite work. So a meeting was held with the chair of the committee to endorse the 23-24 program, and then that went through to council for formal adoption on the 27th of June as well. So I just wanted to draw the committee's note to that. Going forward, we will tie the work program into the timing of the Audit and Risk Committee so that we can have things in front of us at the right times. And the third thing really is under audit and assurance, everything's on track. Audit New Zealand is still completing the 21-22 annual report, and the management report's not been received at this time, but we're getting very close to finalising the audit, at which point we will receive the report and we'll report that back to the September meeting. So those were the key things I wanted to point out.
Thanks for that, Jason. Folk, do we have questions? Yeah, Scotty.
Thank you. Just one question with regards to, just from my understanding, of all of the, that most risks are scheduled for each quarter as a minimum. Why is the operational risk register only yearly?
I'm happy to answer that, John might assist. So we do strategic risks on a quarterly basis, because they're the sort of 12 organisational strategic risks that the committee would want to hear. We do operational risks once a year, and that's because there's something like 30 units within council. We work through a process with them, and if there are any high or extreme, we will report those back to the committee. But at the moment, the work programme talks to just bringing that back to the committee once a year, unless we have a direction otherwise.
Yes.
Mr. Chair, for the operational risk, they are reviewed every 3 months. Quarterly reviews happen every 3 months. But my understanding is that it's annually reported back to this committee on the progress, and what's, as Jason said, there's anything of importance, it would come to this committee earlier.
Yep, I'm comfortable with that, by the way, too, Scott. That is helpful. I think it's the way that we go. Otherwise, you know, our response is the big stuff. But what I want to just add to that, Scott, is actually our responsibility is to be through BEAD comfortable that the risk management process that has been set up by council is operating. And we do that. I mean, I think the report we've got coming up is good. Perhaps that's why you'd like to see it quarterly, because it's an interesting insight. But essentially, they're in the realm of BEAD and his SLT team to manage. And our role is more that there is a system to manage rather than actually getting down into that detail. So our focus is on, quite rightly, the quarterly risk, as this John has said, and that's where we should take it, but it's still good that we see it annually. I think one of the things that it does come, and we might want to reflect as a committee, your point, John, is that if anything is significant, it comes up. The question is what constitutes significance. We have had an attempt, wrong word, we did do that work last year with Andrew Douglas, looking at the idea of risk appetite. And it may be, Jason, and John, that we perhaps just reflect where that's at. Are we still comfortable with it? Because that's going to dictate what gets escalated up. Because if something's outside our risk appetite, it should be coming to this committee, whether it's an operational risk or whether it's a big risk. So we can perhaps just, Jason, I'm sorry that I'm creating action points, you and John, perhaps you and I should just circle around and just check that one out, that we've got that right. Because we haven't talked about escalation in terms of the operational report, but we should perhaps just reflect, for your comfort, our comfort, what would come to this committee from the operational level and why would it come? Because we need to know that.
So just on that, Mr. Chair, as part of that, I agree with that, and that's going to be built into the new updated risk management policy framework document.
Oh, brilliant.
Yep.
When does that, I probably should look at my...
No, so the review of the policy framework is about to happen, the actual document.
Yeah.
Because we've introduced a whole new framework altogether into TDC.
Yep.
So the current policy needs updating to reflect that.
Yep.
And that escalation of what comes to that committee is part of that review period.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, I think that takes away the action point, Jason, so you can scrub that from your book. We'll have the policy when it comes up, and it'll give us a chance to look at, Scott, where I'm trying to get to is management deal with a whole bunch of risks which we don't generally have the optics over, but we want to know there's a system in place, A, for them to manage, and B, what would give rise to its escalation to us, and it comes back to what is our risk appetite. So we'll look for that when that comes through. Anything else on the agenda here, guys? Just noting, Jason, that we've got a meeting in September. In some way, the committee will need to transact some support for council when it comes to the annual report by the 31st, somewhere between, I suspect, the 20th of October and the 31st of October, if that's okay. But we can do this one-off. Yes,
Through you, Mr Chair, we were looking to try and change the date of the September meeting.
Oh, were you?
Yeah, in order
Yeah.
to try and line it up with the annual report.
Yep.
Because the annual report will be coming later in October, and we were hoping that if it would work, because the annual report won't be ready for review, so I think you, Jackie, were looking to arrange an alternative date.
Yeah, through to the 9th of October.
9th of October?
But
What I'm trying to reflect is that the final, what is it, the final annual report's due on the 20th, so that's with all its amendments, correct? No, go to page 279, and I know John's on the line now as well, but if you go to 279, which is what I did, it's on the printed version. I don't know whether that's the same on I presume it's the same on the electronic agenda. You'll see here that the final annual report available, incorporating all amendments agreed between us, is due on the 20th of October. My only question is, should we be meeting somewhere between the 20th and the 31st? And one of the things that would come under this would be, do we have an effective date for when John is going to give us verbal clearance? So, look, if it's going to be the 9th of October, it's going to be the 9th of October, and we just need to think through what gets us to the 31st of October without too much inefficiency or administrative strife. But equally, in looking at this as committee chair, those two dates to me are pivotal to when and how we can as a committee fulfil our roles. So that's a long way of coming back to, yes, understand you want to change it. Can I say I think every committee in the country is changing their dates from a September meeting to October. So we can explore that as an action point coming out of the meeting. If I could just leave that. Yeah, Janice.
Whereas if we meet on the 9th and we get a reasonably final,
That's right.
we could perhaps approve it, delegate
Yeah.
any minor amendments to
Yeah.
U and B, for
Yeah.
instance.
Well, that's the other option. That's why I'm saying it. And I mean, for personal reasons, the 9th will probably be better than the 21st for a whole bunch of reasons. But Jason, we'll just take that one offline and work that one through. In principle, happy we move it, unless there's any other objection. It does mean our distance between meetings goes out a month, but I think I'm comfortable with that. Nobody else is unhappy with that. Okay, we'll make that one work, and that solves my problem. So look, unless there's any other comments, can I just move from the chair that we receive and note the Audit Committee work program? Thank you, Nigel. I'll take it for granted that we realise September's going to have an October column there. It just all moves out. Any questions, comments? No. In that case, I'll put the motion. All those in favour, please say aye. Those against, it's carried. Brilliant. Oh, we've got time for more work. How's that? Outstanding recommendation register. I should have driven me nuts going through these schedules at the back here, Jason, but I got through them. In your hands.
Thank you. I would like to apologise to the committee. The original date I noted is now shown in the register.
Oh, okay.
I show it in the Excel version of the register, however it was transposed to Word and that column was missed off. So as Janice pointed out, there's a column missing which we had added in around the date of the audit, the original date that each audit was undertaken. So I'll email committee members with a version which includes that.
You don't
so
need to do that.
That's just for your information.
Just for next time.
So it's been a long time since the 6th March meeting. We've had a bit more resource in place and we really have tried to focus on the outstanding recommendations. We had 58 at the end of the March meeting. We managed to close 29 during this quarter, and I'm not going to go through them. What I will focus on is the ones that are remaining. So we've got 29 recommendations outstanding. Of concern, I guess, is that 26 of them are overdue. And if I just sort of talk to some of those. So 12 of the overdue ones relate to, I guess, historical recommendations from Audit New Zealand. We're still working through with John and his team on some of these ones. And some of these flow into recommendations which will come out in this audit that we're currently finalising as well. 8 recommendations relate to the ALGIM audit, so the Association of Local Government Information Management. We've been waiting to get the information management policy signed off, which SLT has signed off, and it's attached to this. So there's a whole lot of work that can flow following that now. And so I'm hoping that by the September and or October meeting that we've finished a lot of those ones. Fraud and corruption, we were very aggressive in our desire to finish that by 31 December. With lack of resourcing, we sort of struggled with that. We've brought Deloitte in over the last 3 to 4 months to help in that space. There's a couple of reports on this agenda that talk to that. We've focused on 4 priority recommendations, and there still are 4 other recommendations which we'll focus on throughout the rest of the next couple of months. There's a standardised cash handling policy that we're going to finish by the end of September, and one also relates to procure to pay, which we are just working through. We've selected a vendor which will come up in the business improvement section when we talk about ESCA. So those are the ones which are outstanding. Happy to take any questions on any of the detail of the recommendations.
Thanks, Jason. Scott?
Just one question with regards to on page 41, number 140, that we highlight this as an option for council with regards to forestry internal audit report. Consider investigating further the expansion of forestry activity with the aim of providing a return to council. The status update there, it provides an update as such, but for me it doesn't actually answer the question whether the activity expansion will be considered.
I see fingers pointing. Is that your way, is it, Andrew?
So we do have Bill Steens coming in to talk about the Parriora Dam later today, and if Andrew's unable to provide any clarity around that, he could answer it at that time. But Andrew, any comment for now?
So this is about the dam proposal. Forestry side of things, yeah. So we're managing our forestry assets, well, I think reasonably well, yeah. We are there has recently been a link audit to tying up with the ETS side of things. Is there anything else you want to know? Yeah.
Well, just reading that particular recommendation, it suggests considering investigating further the expansion of activity, and to me that's not clear. If it is clear, if you can better explain what the consideration is with the expansion of it as an activity. I read about the ETS, but as a venture to provide greater return to council, it's just not clear to me what the consideration is.
So the implication here, I would take it as that in fact the answer is no, there won't be an expansion. Yeah. And I think your question is that the conclusion we've reached? Yes. Michelle?
Didn't we at our last meeting talk about having a strategic management plan for our forestry assets when we had that forestry audit come back and was presented to us?
So I can't tell you that. We'd have to go back and check the records. Yes, Pete?
Yeah, it might be up top here. Through the activity management plan, we would look at what options there might be for forestry. Couple of things on the ETS, TDHL. It's probably, would it be 12 or 18 months ago, Andrew? They went and looked at the commercial viability of investing in forestry for effectively in terms of whether there was a return using ETS as the sort of the basis of the return in addition to the capital growth. And they did that after some preliminary work by us, which we then handed on to them, which showed that in terms of for council, there was a lot of risk for us going and looking to acquire forestry because for that purpose, they concluded much the same, and they did more in-depth work which they provided to us that actually there wasn't at that time, and potentially there's even less now, with the range of issues that have emerged around forestry, as to whether or not there would be any benefit. So we haven't pursued it from that point of view. The next time when we would look at it would be through the activity management plans that we do as part of the long-term plan, as to whether or not there is and that's something that can be looked at. We can note that in terms of whether or not there's a commercial benefit in us expanding further. But I think generally what our team have found when they've looked is that within the district there's not land that would immediately present itself as being suitable for council to acquire with a view to using it for forestry. But Andrew, I don't know if you have more on that, but we could look at it as part of the activity management plan. Where the work was that got to that had been done was there was a lot of risk for us to go and acquire forestry for the purposes of the carbon trading scheme, and we would almost certainly have had to go outside of the district or do it via some secondary fund to do that. Don't know if that helps.
Yes, Peter.
Yes, I can attest to the TDHL review on it, and I remember that very clearly, but I also remember us having some significant conversations in council in regard to that, and I know because Councillor Booth had driven it quite strongly, and I think the appetite, it really came back based on all the variables and the risk for it, that we didn't have the appetite to look at that any further, but I'm not sure where that got closed out or not, but I'm taking when I read this that was the case.
That's the implication from it. Yes, that's the implication that I took from it. Scott, B?
Yeah, through you, Mr. Chair, all that work occurred prior to the election. So it was prior to when you were on the council. But we could go and revisit or represent that work, which might be helpful if you like.
Well, I wonder then just to assist perhaps the four new councillors, if we could, it doesn't even need to be revisited, I don't think, but if you could provide that information, that'd be useful.
Yeah, you share the information. I don't think it has to come back to the committee, Scott. I think it's the point you're making. So yes, I think that's a good way to go about it. I mean, the logical time, by the way, if you are wanting to suggest a revision, which wouldn't be from this committee, would be actually in your LTP work. But that's a different. I'm glad to say different to me. So making information available sounds like the key thing for Scott and probably Michelle and some of the other people. Yeah.
Sorry, Mr. Chair, it's just a matter of process. In order for this to work, if we can just add it to the resolution that will provide that information, because then it falls as an action point, that means it gets followed up all the way through the system.
We'll do
not back here in September or October, you are asking where it is.
Yeah.
Because we've actioned it then via our action point.
Okay. So Jess, if you could just note that we'll resolve that the information related to forestry be passed on to new members. It may even be that you want to put it to all councillors so that they're aware of it. So perhaps just the councillors would be fine. Any other comments? So yes, Michelle.
I just had a question about page 31, and it's on the asset renewals and disposal. So it has an auditor comment there, but it doesn't seem to be a council response to that auditor comment. So what are we doing now? It's just at the bottom of page 31, it says the proposed approach does not fully address the recommendation.
So the process that I went through with the Audit New Zealand ones was I provided responses to Audit New Zealand that I thought closed them out. Audit New Zealand on this one come back saying, actually, we don't quite think it's closed out for the reasons that they've specified. So we're still in progress in terms of some of the activities that we're focused on. One of our challenges is that because we haven't closed out this year's audit, we can't do our capitalisation, we can't do all the things we'd normally do by now, which puts us at risk already before we started the next annual report, that we haven't done some of these things. So the sooner we can close out our audit, not just from a tick the box exercise, it means that Andrew and her team can get on and do some of those things. So at the moment we can't close that out because we're still in progress.
And there are a few of those, aren't there, Jason?
There are a few. So anything where it says in progress, where I wanted to update the committee with where we actually think we are, Audit New Zealand have provided some guidelines in terms of where they think we are, and we're still working towards them.
Thank you. Any other questions or comments? Look, it strikes me that I think firstly we should just acknowledge, Jason, the effort of the team to get rid of these. The fact that you've got over, well, yeah, half of them out of the way is actually substantial. And while I suspect you'd like a few more to have been closed out, as in like the last one, at least there's clear action. We know where we stand, and we've got some action. So that's pretty. I'm quite comfortable with that. Thank you for indicating the nature of the broad ones. I think actually later in the meeting we deal with things like the Elgin cybersecurity assessment. So we've got a sense of being able to revisit that even within this meeting. So unless members, there's other comments you'd like or questions you'd like to make, I'm going to propose that we move to the resolution. All right, Peter, you're moving? Realising there's a small amendment that we make the forestry information available to councillors. Do I have a second? Thank you, Scotty. Any debate on the motion? Being none, I'll put it all those in favour. Please say aye. Those against? It's carried. Right, John, we're past 9:30. Are our friends with us? Oh, that looks like they are. I can see Matthew. We're waiting for Deanna, are we? G'day, Matthew. How are you, mate? Are we waiting for Deanna, or are you the light brigade?
I'm the light brigade today, I'm afraid. Deanna is currently in transit to yourselves for another meeting later on. We just couldn't get the logistics to work out to be there on time this morning, unfortunately.
Oh, well, welcome to the meeting, Matthew. And look, just good form. What I'll do is I'll ask John here to just address the item, and then I suspect pretty quickly we're going to hear from you. So, John, is there any comments you want to make before we open up with Matthew?
Just basically, we've asked Aon to come along just to give one of the things that's identified is that going forward with our insurance program, we should move away from a transactional approach to a strategic approach. Earlier in the year, Aon did a presentation on this. It's just to re-emphasise what we should be looking at moving forward and working with Aon on this approach, because it is quite resource intensive. But also they're going to talk about collective insurance, the pros and cons of that as a council, and just some general trends of what they're seeing. So Matthew, I hand it across to you.
Thank you for that.
Thank you.
Welcome, Matthew. Anybody that's worked around the sector, I guess as I have, Matthew's a regular feature at a good number of audit committees. So Matthew, look, John, thank you for that lead, and I just wonder if I could just re-emphasise, Matthew, I would be very interested that you are clear for us as a committee the difference between being strategic and transactional over our insurance. And also, I hear with some interest the idea of a collective, which obviously through you I'm much more familiar with from a Waikato Bay of Plenty perspective. So if you could make certain your comments you address those, that'll be fine along with your general update. Thank you.
Sure. Okay, thank you for the time this morning. I will rattle through some of this. I know we've probably got a bit of time constraints, but this is absolutely not death by PowerPoint. Please sing out as we go along if there are any questions that come to mind. I shall share my screen if I can press the buttons in the right order. Host disabled participant screen sharing. So I don't know if that's something we can fix at your end.
Just wait a sec, Matthew. Yep, you might have challenged us here technically, Matthew. So I think Jess might be solving the problem.
Okay. Well, whilst that's happening, I'll give a brief background so you understand where we, Aon, are coming from. As Bruce has just alluded to, we are quite a large player in the local government sector as a broking firm. In one way or another, we act for about 70 councils in New Zealand. I have been doing council business since 2009, and there are a lot of themes that come up. We have a group of people within Aon who basically do councils. That's what we do. We've set up a practice group to ensure that we get delivery of the same message and also share information with each other about the issues that we are seeing in the local government sector. The current market is challenging. And hopefully if we can get the IT to work, I've got a couple of graphics that we can put up.
Matthew, you should be able to share your screen now.
Be good.
A little bit of luck.
Perfect. Hopefully that's the right one. Can you see?
We're good to go. Matthew. Good to go, man.
Good go. Excellent. Okay, so I'll just hopefully these slides change over. So I started to ad lib a little. We'll talk about who the team is very quickly. We'll give you a very brief market update, and then the core part of this is about changing from a transactional approach to buying insurance to a more strategic approach, and then we will touch on collective purchasing. So, as I said, we've got a team of people. This is us. There are others, but these are the ones who you will have interactions with. Steve Kane is the head of Aon's local government practice. He's based up in Auckland. There's myself and Deanna, who some of the team will meet with later. We have local South Island representation. Sally Parker is the main day-to-day contact for you. And David Robson on that list is based in Hamilton with me. He is our infrastructure person. So we're talking about the reticulation network, etc. So that's who we are. The market. I was just starting to talk about this. None of this is rocket science. We have seen over the last 5 years, basically for each year for the last 5 years has been the worst year on record for weather-related losses. So what we're talking about there are storms, cyclones, hurricanes. There are other natural disasters, but weather-related losses have increased significantly. Hurricane Ian in the US, that's a significant loss which has impacts on the global insurance market. And of course, this year we have seen the events take place in Auckland, Northland and the Hawke's Bay. So previously, insurance markets used to focus on, but the price drivers were the earthquakes, volcanoes, these big catastrophic events. What we are seeing is an increase in frequency and severity of what the insurance market calls secondary nat cat events, i.e. those weather-related events. And that's not changing, it's just getting worse. If we bring that to a local perspective, i.e. a New Zealand perspective, and what you have to remember is, whilst we place business locally for yourselves within New Zealand, all of the insurance market, those New Zealand-based insurers largely have offshore ownership. Insurers reinsure. So when there is a major loss, there is flow-on effect to the reinsurance markets as well. For the sake of time, I'm not going to read all of those statistics out to you. But as you can see, there are some significant numbers in there. The dollar values will always be what the dollar values are. I think the one that gives us an idea of the severity of these events is if you think there's over 14,000 claims have been paid out already. Yes, they are mostly in the private motor household space, but they are significant volumes. And there are some large corporate losses within that as well. We act for Hawke's Bay Regional Council. They have suffered significant damage to their infrastructure, river protection network. So what does this mean in the current market space? I will come back to that slide in a second. What this means is increase in reinsurance costs. Some insurers in New Zealand, we're talking about property placements. Some insurers in New Zealand have already stated they're looking at a 20% rating increase. They may start to look at applying differing deductible levels for flood weather events. And there is another adjunct to that. which is the impact of class actions and litigation funding from a liability perspective, we have already seen allegations arising towards some of the Hawke's Bay councils that it's their fault that all of this happened. Now, I'm paraphrasing hugely there, but we are expecting to see parties try and hold councils responsible for some of the damage that they have suffered, whether that is that they allowed them to build in a certain area in the first instance, or is that something along the lines of maintaining assets or keeping things up to date? Those may well be spurious, but there is a slightly personal opinion here. There is significant money at stake that somebody will look to chase some of that money to get back. So we will keep a close eye on this, but that is what we are expecting. So we have market pressures, we have increasing costs, and then currently we have a double whammy, which is why I'm coming back to this slide. Inflationary pressures. I haven't read a newspaper yet this morning. I don't know what's happening in Russia and whether Putin's still in power, but there are lots of global events taking place which are impacting supply chains, which therefore is impacting cost. There are labour shortages, and as you can see from that graphic, although that is a little old now, New Zealand inflation is up there. You know, we're living in inflationary times, and I don't need to tell any of you that. You only need to go grocery shopping at the moment. Why is that an insurance consideration? It's an insurance consideration because the cost of rebuilding anything is increasing. So your premiums for your property and for your infrastructure are largely based on a rate percent applied to the total value of those assets. And at the moment, we are seeing significant increases in the value to replace those assets because of these inflationary pressures. So when we talk about here that there may be a 15 to 20% increase on rate, if your values have gone up by 15%, you're potentially looking at a 30 to 40% premium increase. Now this, we are acutely aware there is an affordability issue with local authorities on this, on the impact of these premiums, which is why we then get into the whole conversation, excuse me, of strategic versus transactional. So historically, and this isn't a comment about yourselves directly, but historically, councils have purchased insurance. They're quite a risk-averse organisation, and there are many reasons for that. And historically, councils have bought programs which are basically off the shelf. We buy one of those, two of those, one of those, that transactional purchase. With the issues around affordability, we need to now start looking at what can you do. The market is always going to be what the market is, but what can we do to mitigate the impacts of the market? So there is a relatively simple graphic explanation to this, although it's actually quite hard to do. And this is the journey we're going to start working with John and the team shortly. If you change an insurance program because it is driven by the price, in my opinion, that is the tail wagging the dog. What you actually need to do is go through a process where if you look at this hexagon, if you go in a clockwise direction, you have to go through a process, and the very last point on that process is optimizing the insurance program. And this could be something as simple as, can we afford to take a big deductible on our material damage program? Now, there has to absolutely be a cost benefit for you on that, but do we understand the exposures and the risks that you face? What is that second point, risk positioning? What is your financial ability and willingness to accept those risks? You may have a very, very strong and healthy balance sheet, in which case you could consider some of this. What are the controls and preventions? What are you doing about asset management? Are you looking at the condition of properties, and how you're making decisions about whether you would replace some of those properties if they were lost. And if we go through this process, and there is a structure to it, if we go through this process, at the end of it, there is the option to look at buying an insurance program, which could be significantly different from the one that you have currently, but is more fit for purpose, or I should say fit for your purpose. And it is unique to you. So I did skip over one slide. It's a little bit heavy probably for going through completely, but it gives us an idea of a bit of a thought process. There are some risks and exposures that you have to retain. And if you think about that as being for your own home insurance or your own business insurance, that is the stuff the insurers won't cover. Now, traditionally, this is a deductible. You might have a $500 deductible or a $1,000 deductible. Then there is some stuff that you can transfer, and you may have capital that can sustain losses in that stage. And then you get to a point where there's stuff you have to transfer, i.e. you can't afford to take the exposure yourself. Now, these are relatively simple words, but actually understanding what your appetite looks like and how your funds are and what the longer term plan is, these are the things that we need to go through with you. Are there any questions on that? I have rattled through it a little bit, but are there any questions on that at the moment?
In effect, Matthew, you would argue our approach to date is transactional, correct?
Correct.
Yeah.
To be fair, Bruce, I think most, with the exception of a few, most councils are currently at this stage where they are looking to change from transactional to strategic.
Right. So the critical thing here, folk, is that move to, we, as you say, off the shelf, we like that, we don't like that, we'll take it, we won't take it, to one which is more embracive of the nature of risk. Is that comfortable? Do people have questions around that they'd like to raise? No? We're okay, good to go.
Okay. Right, so collective purchasing. One of the things that we have been very successful at is arranging insurance procurement on a collective basis with members of a group. For example, we have the Waikato group of councils through their local authority shared services arrangement. We purchase, excuse me, we purchase one insurance program. If I focus on material damage, it's the easiest one to explain. We purchase one material damage policy for them. That group of councils probably declare somewhere in the region of, I don't know, $2.5, maybe not that much, $2 billion worth of assets. It's a very, very, very bad day in the Waikato. Oops, sorry. It's a very, very bad day in the Waikato if we were to lose $2 billion worth of assets in one go. We are talking about Armageddon scenarios. So what we do is go through that hexagon previously, establish some appetites, and then buy a loss limit. That limit is shared across the member councils. So what are the benefits of doing that? Well, straight off, there's economies of scale. If you're wanting to buy, it's just like buying anything else. If you want to buy one of something, it comes with a price. If you want to buy 100 of something, that unit price is less. The same is true for insurance. And by having in the Waikato group, for example, 10 councils collectively purchasing, there are economies of scale to those individual councils involved. We can get more market interest. As I said, we're going to the market with $2 billion worth of assets rather than just say, and I always pick on poor old Otrahonga, who are the smallest council up there, rather than with, I can't remember their number, $50-60 million worth of assets. So there is more market interest. Because of that, we get a better rate for the group than you would do as an individual. However, we have kept the flexibility within the arrangement that each individual member can have its own limits and deductibles. So, as an example of strategic versus transactional, if you buy an insurance program which is based on a total of all of your declared values for property, we don't do that for the Waikato councils. We go through and look at what is the realistic likelihood that you're going to lose all of your stuff in one go. It's very, very remote. And therefore, we don't need to buy to the full value of those assets in terms of an overall sum insured. We buy a loss limit. That also introduces more insurers to the market because they're not putting up so much capital, which then loops back to the competitive rates. Now, there are, frankly, some downsides. Claims management. Most councils that are in a group have some form of memorandum of understanding around how claims proceeds are shared out. And it's not particularly complicated, but it does have to be gone through. And there is also a little bit of the share the gain, share the pain philosophy to this. Motor, for example, we buy collective motor policies. If one council has a really, really bad year because of an outlier claim, they don't necessarily get pinged for all of the increase in premium because they've had the claim. That increase in premium is shared amongst the members because there's no reason why it couldn't have been another council. So we do operate on that basis, but the benefits far outweigh the negatives, especially in the current market that we're in. And to be honest, we don't foresee that market changing anytime soon. So we're floating this idea past yourselves, and we act for a couple of other councils within the region. And it's a longer term conversation, but we are trying to establish if there's any appetite, again, assuming that there is a cost benefit to you, if there is any appetite in being a little bit more collective and collegiate in the purchase of insurance programs. Are there any questions on that?
Thanks for that, Matthew. That's really helpful. I think you've got one, Janice.
Thank you. Matthew, I've had some experience with collectives, particularly in the university sector. And if you're the biggest or the smallest, it can be slightly painful. But I'm just wondering why you mentioned the councils in the Waikato area. That's concentrating the risk there. Yes, you might not lose all the assets at once, but you've got a greater chance of it than if you diffuse them over the country. And you mentioned other councils in this region. I wondered if in this region is an appropriate collective to be thinking about.
Through you, Bruce, it's a very valid question, and you do have to be careful about who is within the group. I can give you an example. I mean, the Waikato, to just step back a bit, the Waikato from a natural disaster point of view is relatively benign. So it still has an exposure from the earthquake and the like, but it is relatively benign. There is also a group in the Manawatu Wanganui. That does not include Palmerston North City Council. And there is a reason for that. PNCC would skew the numbers so dramatically that it wouldn't necessarily be of benefit to the other members within the group when it comes to a rating point of view. So we do have to be careful around the makeup, and it is different through different geographies and different exposures. But the point probably that I didn't explain very well is if we get those limits set right, and those limits again are a scientific process to understand what the maximum loss would be in the geographic region that's collected. If we get those limits right, the premium that is charged would be less per cent than if you were to go to the insurance market on your own, because insurers have, especially at the moment, there are some minimum premium levels. So if you're replicating that same minimum premium level for half a dozen councils, if you did one program or one placement for half a dozen councils, you remove that minimum premium issue from the insurers because they're collecting sufficient premium pool. So that, therefore, when the allocations are done of premiums to those member councils, does effectively reduce the rate per council. Does that answer the question?
Yeah, it wasn't really a question, it was just an observation. You wouldn't want to be
Okay.
too much bigger, much smaller, or highly concentrated re-risk with your colleagues in the collective. So, yep, I'm happy with that. It's a
Yeah. And I think if I picked Matthew up correctly, because it sounds like, John, we are going to do a program with Aon to look at both the structured versus the strategic versus the transactional, and I presume the collective. What is that? Is that at Canterbury Mayoral Forum level, is it, or is it? What's that? Yes, I've got John, I've got Bede, and I've got Trudy. One might be speaking for all. I don't know.
Yeah, it's through the Canterbury Corporate Forum, which is one of the forums and one of the working groups there.
Yeah. So, well, I think actually that Matthew has been careful enough to say you need to think it through. So, perhaps your points were made, Janice, and I suspect Matthew knows that well, and that needs to be thought through. Who do we pony up to in terms of our collective, and how does that happen? Thanks for that, Janice. Are there any other questions for Matthew at this stage, or John? Yes.
I would just make an observation that every board I'm involved with is moving to the strategic rather than the transactional, and it does involve quite a bit of work, a greater understanding of your assets and your risks, etc. But it is significantly worthwhile.
Agreed, and I think I could endorse that too, given, I have to be careful, it's with Matthew as well, but I've seen that elsewhere as well, even if it is the Waikato, Janice, it seems to have helped, so there we go. Okay, folk. Matthew, I must confess, I think we've probably spent the time we can, but I think that's valuable. John, I just want to be clear, we're now on a process of addressing these two issues with Matthew and obviously some of our colleagues around Canterbury, correct?
So with the strategic approach, the next step is to sit down with Aon and create a roadmap that we can bring back to this committee to show the steps we're going to take from the strategic approach. Right. And then each step is going to be complete in that type of thing. For the collective, as my understanding, it's through that forum group that's going to be addressed. Okay. But definitely for this the strategic approach, that's working with Aon, setting up a meeting, laying out the boundaries, the scope of work, and then taking it.
Right, okay. So presumably you can come, well, now that we've moved it to October, you can come back to us in October with a plan with Matthew to how we'll implement it.
That's the intent, to sit down there and create the roadmap moving forward to bring back to the October meeting.
Brilliant, that's great. Well, Matthew, thank you for that this morning. That's really handy, and obviously there's a good challenge there for us to pick up the pace. So going right back to the original premise here, we are in place with our insurance for the 1 July year, as you said, Jason, we're past that, so we're getting the briefing now about how we look and take this one forward. Okay, look, I'm just going to move from the chair that we receive the report, including thank you to Matthew and Aon for their presentation. Have a seconder, please. Thank you, Nigel. I'll put the motion. All those in favour, please say aye. Those against? It's carried. Thanks, Matthew. Appreciate that. It's been good to meet you again this morning.
Thank you for the time.
No worries.
Bye-bye.
Right, if I could move to item... and welcome, Trudy. Welcome, Timaru. Bit cheeky. Right, 6.6, mate. We're in your hands.
6.5.
6.5. Oh, gee whiz. You're right. 6.5.
So David Seif was originally meant to be here at 11. I've just spoke to him. He is here.
Okay.
So he was coming in at 10, so he should be a minute or so away. I'm happy to start off this one. Jackie, he's downstairs in meeting room 1, in one of the... I'll show you, Mr. Chair, how you want to proceed.
Sorry? Oh, okay, rightio. Can we, is there something else we can, actually, they're all reasonable sized papers, aren't they? Is there anything here that we could deal with while we're waiting on David? No, there's not really, is there?
You could move on to strategic risk and we'll just
It's
come
a
back.
reasonably short paper, isn't it? So we could perhaps deal with strategic risk, John. That would be a good idea. That's item 6.8. Thank you. Now we'll make it fill the rest of the day because actually it's only 2 pages, but it's quite critical. John, if you give us any thoughts you'd like to raise, that'd be great.
So, as reported at the last meeting, we've completed the strategic risk profiling with all the respective group managers, and we've just completed our first quarterly review, 3-month review, with each of the strategic risks. As highlighted in there, there's only one strategic risk that's really moved from one risk assessment area to another, and that's around personnel, and it's highlighted on the map there, where it went from very high down to high. As an explanation as to why that occurred, is around the survey had been completed, so that went from partial to effective, and that essentially moved the risk rating from very high to high with that. So it was quite a clean review. There were some effectiveness ratings that went from 40 to 60% or 50 to 70, but it didn't have an overall impact on moving it from a residual rating from one level to another. There's expected to be more movement in the next quarterly review around some of these risks, but as asked for at the last meeting, and hopefully it's quite readable this time, I've blown up the bubbles so you can read it a bit more, and there's ratings on the side there. You see where it sits from inherent to residual, so I hope it's a lot more clearer compared to the last presentation. That's basically
Yep, no, it's
the
good.
update.
No,
on
thank
that.
you, John. So, questions of clarification or comments for John? Yep, Janice.
Yeah, okay. Just a concern that despite the mitigants, we still have very high residual risks for climate change and the natural and built environment. If the mitigants were all fully effective, what would the situation be?
Hold on, sorry, my apology. Button. I'll bring it down to the back line. As I said at last meeting, climate change will probably sit here for 2 to 3 years because the tail on some of these mitigations need to be put in place is a long time. The urban built environment, we had discussions around that with Andrew and Paul, and it's expected within 6 to 12 months they'll move to, just based on the mitigations that sit there, because some of it is actually dictated by I always get this terminology mixed up, Andrew, around the urban, that unitary plan that's there's a plan out there that hinders your capacity to build.
Was it high productivity land at
Yeah.
the moment is restricting our growth areas, and it is a challenge there. But we also are doing development area plans for future growth areas, and that process is just kicking off now. So that'll be a very important tool to reduce the risk.
Just in terms of the risk table, some organisations have the inherent risk rating, then they have the residual, which is if things are fully mitigated, and then there's the current. So you can sort of see where you're intending to go and where you currently are. I'm taking that this residual risk rating is the actual current residual risk. Yeah, cool, thank you.
Another way you could present that, you could present it by a tornado map, where you say where your inherent is, where you're currently sitting residually, and where your target is, which goes, the tomato, you've seen what I'm talking about. So that's another way of presenting it. It's just how complex you want to get with the presentation.
I think the important thing is that we're on track and we're monitoring them, and let's not get hung up on the complexity.
Actually, I'd beg to differ just a tad. I would like to know what our risk appetite is for these, which probably is our target rating. because quite frankly, if these are our big risks and we are above our target, that's where our resources should be going. So I don't have a strong sense about what our priorities are here. It's a very good and efficient report, but we're missing, and I've just put a little rectangle. I'm putting a rectangle which is against the column on the right-hand side there, which would be risk appetite or target, whatever you want to call it, doesn't worry me. But we have done the work with Andrew, unless we're going to say it's out of date. We have done the work with Andrew on what is our risk appetite. We should be matching these, because these are our big risks. And it should be driving our response as an organisation. If climate change really is our big risk and we're above target, we actually should be focused on actually what are we doing to move residual risk to target. Now, in this case, I agree with you, John, it's probably going to be over some time, and we probably are going to sit above our risk appetite. But I want to know what is the plan to get us there. And that's what I'm missing here, so that when I look at, say, that middle box, it's all possible, and if it happens, it's major. My assumption is that's actually above our risk appetite. But there's a lot of our key risks, I would argue, are probably above our risk appetite. And I don't know whether we corporately, I'm not just looking at you, John, whether we corporately have got the right focus on our major risks. That's what I'm trying to, because there's nothing here to give me that answer. That's really what I'm after. Pete, I think you want to jump in there.
Yeah, thanks, Mr. Chair. Does because that workshop, or where we settled, was pre the election, so there's a number of new councillors, and so I think given that we're going into a long-term plan and we've probably got better visibility over our strategic risks, the mitigants, where they sit, I do wonder whether we revisit that work in time for it to actually be reflected into how the council and the community wish to have that discussion with the community, because some of these will be dependent on how much do they want to pay in order to mitigate that risk to a particular level, if you like, or where they want it to sit. So it might be timely to revisit that work, and I think we can build on what was done it was in August last year.
Oh, look, Bea, thank you for that, and thank you for, I had wondered when I'd said to Scotty we'd done our risk appetite statements, whether in fact that was pre or post the election. So if you look to be dumbfounded, Scotty, I don't blame you, because you weren't part of that process. So the answer would be yes, Pete. I mean, we should probably get into our annual life cycle as a committee, I'm used to, and most committees, it probably takes an hour or two as a workshop just before a meeting or something, just to go through, are these risk appetites right? I think that would be a good idea. I must confess your point's also made well around the LTP, which is, that's why we should revise the strategic risks annually. But in this case, it becomes important when you've got your LTP settled next year that indeed we check that these strategic risks do relate to achievement of your LTP, because that will be important as well. So that's a really important point. Okay, so that's super cool. John, and I would open this to all management, including you, Bede. Essentially, having said, as always, John, there's more information I'd love to see, but let's not get too worried about that. Are we broadly comfortable with these settings in terms of our journey as a council? That's a big question, but I wonder if somebody could give me an answer on that. Are we happy with where we're at the moment, or rather, is it under control? Are we happy we're going in the right direction?
From where I sit, I'd say yes, we are. There's a lot of work to be done. It's recognised by having the meetings with the group managers. Like anything, you look at what we have done is that for those mitigations that are still ineffective or not, or partially, we have rated them into preventative administrative recovery. So that gives the group managers more direction on the preventative mitigations they should focus on, as opposed to recovery, which happens after the event. So I believe, given the short time that we started this whole new journey since November, December last year, we're progressing maturity-wise very well.
Thank you for that, John. Yes, Michelle.
Just one other question. Can we have a bit of a description of what you mean with the titles? Because if I sat here and went natural and built environment, what is the risk around that? I'd probably come up with a different answer to Scott.
Okay, fine.
It might actually be, I mean, I'm all for trying to be efficient with it. It may well be that on the second page, under each of the titles, you could just put that descriptor.
That's easily achieved.
I do like trying to be summarised, but we can be too summarised. So we've got a couple of things there. One, which is actually what is our target risk or what's our risk appetite. And look, one of the other ways, if I can give you a hint, which is really my question, are we happy, is often people put arrows up or down with a risk. In other words, which way is it trending? Even though it might be, how shall I put it, I mean, you've done that with R5, I agree, but it may even be with your schedule on the second page of the report. Do we have an arrow indicating whether it's going up or going down, or sometimes people would even put a straight line where it's going. Some people call it velocity, whatever. Okay, well, look, that's useful. Thank you for that, John. I think the other thing that we've noted is that it is timely for a risk appetite update. So do you want us to resolve that as well, in your sense of getting that into the process?
That would be very helpful. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Right, so look, in terms of the recommendations, we'll note and receive the report, and the second resolution is that we ask management to seek a risk appetite update by way of workshop, because actually it's a committee responsibility to recommend to council what our risk appetite settings are. So it's a workshop with us. I'll move that from the chair to a seconder. Thank you, Peter. Any discussions on the motion? Being none, I'll put it. All those in favour, please say aye. Those against, it's carried. Right. So we can return now back to item 6.5. Welcome, David. Good to have you here, and appreciate all the hard yards, which is evidenced by Jason's papers. So we'll go to 6.5. Jason, if you could lead off, and I suspect you're going to give the floor to David.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So joining us today, David Seith, Risk and Advisory Partner at Deloitte. So I'll let David introduce himself properly when we get to him. I just wanted to quickly cover off the cover report. So this is really to focus on our 22-23 internal audit program, as well as, I guess, present the draft 3-year audit program. We have had some good news, and certainly Trudy is very happy to announce that we've got a risk and assurance manager that we've managed to recruit. He starts on the 24th of July, so not too far away. I've worked with him at Christchurch City Council before. He moved to a council in the North Island, so he's got good skills in this space, so we're really looking forward to him joining us. The key things I'd like to focus on, as the committee had requested previously, in terms of paragraph 6, I've got the internal audits that have been completed over the last couple of years. So I'm not going to go through it, but just sort of talked about the title, the date, and the scope of the review. So those ones have been completed, and anything outstanding for those appears on the outstanding recommendations register as well. In terms of the status of the 22-23 audits, paragraph 8 talks to those ones. Most of these have been picked up, as David will talk to in a minute, in terms of the 3-year audit program. So the items which are still in progress, we're picking up there. Just like to flag that under attachment 1, we've attached the capital spend project management draft terms of reference, which the committee was keen to see progressed. You'll note that it is in the 3-year program that Deloitte will kick off on, and there was a report back on the onboarding and the induction process as well. We had closed it out last Audit and Risk Committee, but there was no report back in terms of progress on that, so that's just a 1 or 2 pager that I've added in. And really just want to hand over to David now in terms of the 3-year program. Jessica, I think you've got a couple of slides that David was keen to...
Can we perhaps ask questions
We can
about
ask
the
questions.
capital projects and the onboard induction before we get into the
Yep.
into the plan? just in the capital projects review, the terms of reference, is it intended that they will also review the closeout process for each project and what went well and what didn't, so that we capture all those learnings, both good and bad? Because it's not just how it's monitored, but it's how it's closed out.
No, that's a good question. If it's not in the scope, we can add that
Yeah.
into the scope.
And just in the onboard induction, wondered how success is being measured, because there are some graphs there, but they don't show the percentages of each unit that's there. And I wondered if there was a feedback questionnaire loop around those attending, how they felt about it. And I did note that included health, safety and wellness, and some of the later things around health and safety don't refer to wellness at all, so that's just an observation.
Okay. In the absence of Eric, I will come back to you with the feedback.
Oh, you don't need to don't need to come back.
For
It's just
my own interest, yeah. I will.
yeah.
That's right.
Jason, one of the other things when I was reading the capital projects review was a paragraph I didn't quite understand what it meant, and it's probably me. If you look at the fifth bullet point on what the review will cover, which is that bullet point clearly defined change management approval processes, including where appropriate the definition and application of tolerance levels of such changes and deviations from the plan. Can you just explain to me a bit more what that means?
It's a good question. I'd have to think about it a bit more. I think one of the issues when we do capital programs, I guess, is when they change from budget, and so I guess it's that tolerance around how then do we have to seek approval for some of those. I'm not quite sure about the change management aspect around that, so I can come back to you. Again, these are draft, so we'll work with Deloitte around what the exact things we are in the work program to test these things. So I can certainly do some more thinking around that one, as well as the closeout process that Janice has talked about.
I was reasonably comfortable. There were some good concepts in it, and you've helped a bit. I just wonder whether there could be a bit more clarity about what they are. I mean, change management. I went down the line of thinking often with an upgrade or a new building, we're going to have to think about different ways in which staff use it. You know, is it going to require us to be more efficient? Does it mean a new service? All that sort of stuff. In other words, it's not just about the build, it's actually about can we optimise its use. So I thought that was what it was about, but then you've raised good points about what's our tolerance, particularly around financial cost as we face changes. So I just wondered, either we're mixing a couple of things there or just needs to be clarified a wee bit. One of the other things under the objective and scope, which I think, Janice, in lots of ways you have partly touched on, which is the closeout. I was wondering whether one of our objectives and scope points would be assurance that we monitor these appropriate at PSG, SLT, council level. And I would have thought that would have been a valuable part to it, which I didn't quite pick up in terms of our objectives and scope. Sincere apologies, but I just think it would be useful, and I'd just advise that as we take that on.
Yep. No, we can add that in.
Brilliant. Any other questions on those two before we move to the 3-year plan? No? Okay, can we move to the 3-year plan? Thanks, David.
Morning, Chair. Morning, committee members and members of management. I know you've got a full schedule, so I've also heard, I think I must have attended at least 100 audit and risk committees, and this might be the first one ever running ahead of schedule, so congratulations for that.
Are you talking about mine, or are you talking about others as well?
I'll take the report as read, and I've got a slide that's got the proposed programme up that we can talk through, but just some highlights from both from the work that we picked up through the work that we did. Firstly, really good engagement from everybody that we spoke to, both from management and the external parties. We've got a really clear sense that everyone we spoke to can see the value that a really robust, risk-based internal audit plan, internal audit program can bring. In terms of arriving at the plan, I would emphasise that it is proposed, part of the purposes of today is for us to take questions on what we have proposed over the 3 years, and to answer any questions that arise. Considered a number of sources of information in developing the pros plan. Obviously, the interviews that we've had with stakeholders, the documentation that we were provided with in terms of the strategic and operational heat maps and the risk registers, the previous internal audits that have been done, bringing our experience from having run these sorts of programs with very similar sized territorial authorities. I'll just hopefully get the slide up that absolutely nobody can read, so hopefully you've got it in your hard copy documents as well. It has resulted in some material changes from the original one. We feel it represents a good balance of getting assurance over those key systems and controls at the councils, things like asset management, contract management, legislative compliance. We've got a really topical issue in there for next year, for 23-24, being that waste management contract and the billing process. And then we've tried to introduce some engagements that you potentially wouldn't automatically consider be part of an internal audit program. I'm looking specifically at that employee recruitment and retention and recruitment review, noting that it is a key risk for council, and there is some value that we can bring in terms of getting the right specialists involved to come and review a process like that, and hopefully give you some advice on how things can be improved. A couple of final comments before we take questions. The rationale for the engagements that we've chosen is included in the plan. It is ambitious in terms of the number of engagements. I know a number of those year one engagements are already work in progress, but for a council of your size and scale, getting through 6 engagements in 24-25 is ambitious. That's not to say it's not impossible, but I think it is something just to be conscious of for a couple of reasons. One is the impact on staff in terms of the time spent with the audits, and the second one is just to make sure that a lot of the important work starts after the internal audit reports have been tabled and finalised, because that's when you start dealing with the recommendations. It's one of the first things that I do with new clients going in when we're running internal audit programs. The first thing I'll ask is, show me your list of outstanding recommendations, because that's a sign of how well the program's functioning. So you don't want to overload management with heaps and heaps of recommendations that they then feel as though they're under press to deal with, or they're coming up against timelines. So that, I suppose, it's just a sense of the importance of being flexible, and a 3-year plan. 3 years is an awfully long time in this environment that we're in, where things are changing very quickly. There will be a need to think, well, actually, this has popped up on the risk register, or this has increased in risk, or to Bruce's point, we've got something that's trending upwards here. Could we do with some assurance over that? That was all I wanted to say in terms of the introductory remarks. Happy to take questions.
Thanks, David. Appreciate that. So, a very detailed, a comprehensive report, although simply written about what we propose to do. Any questions or comments from committee members? Got a couple, David, just to look. Firstly, overall, I'm comfortable with the plan. I guess the question of achievability really is probably more a question for you, Jason. Have we got the budget to do 6 in 1 year?
It's a mix of delivery by Deloitte and in-house. So one of the first tasks that the new risk and assurance manager will recruit is it's an internal audit position. So a number of these positions will be undertaken internally with the external resource. So look, I feel reasonably confident that we can deliver between those 2 delivery mechanisms.
Great, that's music to my ears then. So look, then just a couple of questions from me about about it. And David, it may be you, it could be with our new risk manager, Jason, but I am interested from our committee's development and understanding perspective. Actually, your introductory comments here, which was to remind us that internal audit is only one source of assurance. And so the idea actually of what is an assurance plan, as in contrast to what is an internal audit plan, is not a bad idea. What is it that we as governors can take on board as giving us assurance across the plethora of things that we do is something that's worth exploring. Clearly, internal audit's one of those key things, but I just would like to note that that would be useful. It's probably as much a point to me, Jason, somebody on the track, it would be worth picking it up. In terms of the program and plan that's in front of us, I'm generally comfortable with it, including your last point made about following up and the fact that number 18 is actually a follow-up review, and after 3 years, I think that would be good. I think it's more than just the recommendations, David. I think it's actually, have we followed it up and are we more effective and enhanced in terms of our performance in that area would be really good. Can I just check with, going down my list, F, which is legislative compliance and integrity review. We have comply with in place, so where does that sit with the legislative compliance angle of that review? So we have a program in place now to give us a level of assurance over our legislative compliance. So where does the internal audit fit within it? That we just apply and comply with appropriately? Or does it got more of a focus around the integrity framework? That's F.
I think there's two elements to this. One is the, we're not going to be doing a substantive piece of work checking that you're complying with every single piece of legislation. It's more about the processes and controls you've got in place to making sure that you are complying with those legislation. And maybe it's a small piece of work because comply with will be working really well. And then the second piece is that integrity framework piece, which is coming off the back of that recently announced framework around integrity. So I suppose it will come down to where the most amount of effort is spent.
Thanks, David. And I assumed it was the latter. Sorry, can be honest. I mean, I don't want us to. I'm very comfortable if there is a sense to which we should be careful about whether we're using comply with appropriately. But we do have a probably what within the sector is seen as the tool to manage our legislative compliance with. I just would wonder what we would be doing in there that would add to that other than ensuring we do it. But if it was the integrity review, which isn't, I suppose it is legislative compliance, but in another sense is a different item, I don't have any trouble with that. Okay, so it's really what's the balance in there, which is fine. Can I just check with M, which is the resource and building consent process? Where does IAN's reviews of the building consent authority fit within this? And also MB are doing broader reviews at this stage. But I think probably my first question is really the key one. Where does the IAN's fit within our building consent process and this proposed internal audit? Yeah, Trudy.
From my previous life, I can answer this question through you, Mr. Chair. So IANS is looking at the quality and assurance of the consents issued. This would be, in my perspective, looking at how we bill, how we making sure that we issue consents correctly, and also in terms of how do we follow up if we have had to issue an abatement notice, for example, and how that is all dealt with, rather than the IANS side of it. So that's where I see it sitting. IANS will continue to function on that quality of and matching what is set out in the Building Act 2004.
And of course this extends to resource consents as well, which is broader. Yeah, as I said, I think MB are doing work in that area as well, Trudy, which I'm not, obviously, I don't know that that's necessarily an ongoing program, but one or two councils I've been involved with have had that look. I hear your point about particularly the enforcement end, or the enforcement end, I think actually is timely. So in that sense, very happy with it. So you'll fit it around that. If that's the case, that's wonderful. So look, that's super cool. That's got my questions done, David.
If I could just come back to your point, Bruce, Mr. Chair.
Call me Bruce. I'd rather you did that, Dave.
All right. I think one of the really useful things that maybe the new risk and assurance manager could do would be to produce an assurance map. So that you are looking, you'll get a one page, and it will start asking these questions on IANS, comply with, and it will give you a really clear view of all the sources of assurance, because there are many.
That's right.
I think think that would be a really interesting first step for the new risk and assurance managers to get them across the operations of the council, and it gives you it's a really neat way of seeing where the gaps are and potentially where we might be doubling up, and so we can free up some resource in order to look at other things.
Great, that's what I'd be interested in.
A couple of comments. One was the IT cyber security. Is that something that Deloitte can do, or is it something that's more technical?
We do have a team of about 80 people that just do that sort of work, yes, so, yep.
And I was, the asset management just noted here under E or 5 or whichever. I was interested in what the scope might be and what the output might be. Is it an asset maturity rating that would come out? What is anticipated there in terms of auditing asset management?
So our terms of reference would set out a series of agreed control objectives in terms of asset management, and then we would score each of those control objectives on is it very ineffective through to best practice. So it would be based on the control objectives that we would agree with management. I know there are asset management specialists that do those asset management maturity type reviews. It wouldn't be in that format, but it would be based on a series of agreed control objectives that we would then give you a score on.
And the infrastructure underground infrastructure is not included there. I was just interested in how the asset management and the infrastructure renewals, what the relationship between those two internal audits might be.
That's a good question.
You don't need to answer it. It'll come out in the scope. But it's and one question, David and Bruce referred to it. The prior audits that have been done, did you consider the follow-ups required when you were putting this plan together? Whether there were any that
in terms of
whether there were any processes that should have improved, and we need to audit those.
We didn't have a look at the extent to which any recommendations that had been made on previous audit reports had been addressed. So we looked at the topics that were covered, but we didn't go as far as saying, have those recommendations been addressed?
I just have a question about the timing of the employee recruitment and review, given that nearly every single meeting since I've joined council we talk about being under-resourced, and whether that should be brought forward, or is there a reason why we've pushed that out a year?
Thank you, good question.
Yeah, like I say, this is a proposed plan, and we can't do everything. And I'm very happy to have a conversation about moving things around.
Without putting the onus on you, Michelle, what would you move out? If we were to bring it forward a year, what would you push out? That's something what David's very politely saying to us.
I was thinking about that too, and I'm not sure about the asset management and the cyber security. I don't know enough about that, but it does worry me that that is one of our highest risks as the employee, and we're not dealing with that first.
Can we just leave that as a think piece for you, please, Jason, just to work through. I take your point, Michelle, very good. It's one of our top risks, although I noticed that we've made a small change downwards in its risk in the course of this quarter, which is good, but it's an absolutely fair point. So if you could take it as a committee matter to think about, that would be really useful. Thanks for that, Michelle. Any other thoughts, questions from folk? Well, that's great. Only other comment I'd like to make, Jason, it occurred to me as I was reviewing this paper, and particularly with Trudy, your engagement of a new risk and assurance manager. I can't recall having seen it, or possibly have, so I stand to be corrected, but I think it would be a good time for us to review the internal audit charter. I base this actually on on a sense that, just as I perhaps have argued an insurance plan would be quite good, elsewhere, and I stress not here in Timaru, there is sometimes within the committee a wee bit of misunderstanding about actually where the internal auditor effectively sits inside an organisation, and their role, their quasi-independence, and their importance to particularly us. Because once we get that internal auditor on board, I'd expect to have some committee-only time with that person directly as well. So if we could just add that, sorry, I know I'm making more work and our agendas are going longer, but if we could have an update on the internal audit charter, I think that would be really, really helpful. Thank you. Right. So that I've got to put that action point down as a resolution, do I?
It helps, Mr Chair.
So if we go with it, we receive a note, we endorse the 3-year plan, but ask management to take into account our general comments. And our third one is that we, at an appropriate time, review or receive we will review the internal audit charter, please. That'd be great. Any debate on that motion, because I'm going to move it. I've got a seconder, have I? I've got a seconder, please. Thank you, Janice. Is there any debate on those motions? We're happy? We know where we're going? Great. I'll put the motion then. All those in favour, please say aye. Those against, it's carried. That's great. Fraud and corruption gap analysis.
Thank you, Mr Chair. So the purpose of this report is really to update the committee on work that the team have undertaken with respect to the fraud and corruption gap analysis report that Deloitte completed last year and was reported through to this committee in September 22. So we were making pretty slow progress in this area due to resourcing, so we brought Deloitte in to sort of help speed us up. The gap analysis, from my perspective, was really good, and it highlighted four key areas that we needed to sort of focus on in this organisation. And even though they're listed in item 5 or paragraph 5, I do just want to touch on them. That we do complete a fraud and corruption risk assessment, that we do develop an organisation-wide sort of fraud and corruption training program, that we do have a look at some analytics around some detection of fraud risk, and that we have a look at a fraud control plan and the policy as well. So in terms of updates, before David just sort of touches on this, David has led 3 sessions back on the 19th of June in terms of fraud and corruption awareness training, and you've got one at 1 p.m. today, and the training's been so successful that the one today, I think we're trying to find a bigger room because there's so many people wanting to go to it. So,
and does that training extend to councillors?
The question was asked at the time, and we don't have an answer for that just at the moment, but we can certainly ask that question. At this stage, it was anyone who was in a leadership role, so GMs, unit managers, team leaders, anyone in the finance team, and anyone in sort of the engagement and culture team as well. Deloitte have undertaken some work on some fraud-focused detection and analysis, and back on 14 June, the team presented to B, Trudy and myself some of the initial findings. We focused on related parties and accounts payable, something like 57,000 transactions that we sort of, and I'll let David talk to in more detail, put it through sort of a bit of a complicator, and it really does highlight where there are related parties that we didn't quite know existed. We're looking at supplier bank accounts, staff bank accounts, we're looking at staff who may have the same bank accounts as another staff member and stuff like that. So we're just really aware of anything that we need to be aware of as management, and we're still working through those. And
just on that, Jason,
yep.
That will feed into the accounts payable controls internal audit?
Some of that will, yes, because it's quite a key aspect of it. So, yeah. And then, even though it's a separate agenda item, which is the next one on the fraud and corruption control plan and the policy, I'd have just highlighted that they were part of the work that Deloitte was undertaking as well. So, happy to hand over to David to give an update, and I think you had some more slides as well.
There's just one more slide. If we can, I feel like Taylor Swift. Getting a bigger room for my presentation. It's good.
I will be finished so early here. You can use this room, David. Don't worry.
Oh, I need to do that. So this is the only other slide I wanted to show. It's the result of the gap analysis, and it's just a really neat way of showing where the strengths are in how an organisation addresses fraud and corruption risk and where those areas for improvement are. And I think it's really timely that Council's going through this, and it's one of the things that I'll mention in my presentation this afternoon is that I sense there's a whole bunch of factors that are resulting in an increased risk of fraud and corruption in terms of the cost of living crisis and interest rates and people coming under more pressure, new ways of working, new technology, COVID, and it's certainly being borne out with the number of times I'm picking up the phone wearing my fraud investigator hat. So I think it's, commend Council, A, on doing the gap analysis exercise, and B, on addressing 3 of those 4 high priority items that we set out, being the training, the analytics and the review of the policy. I think the good news is obviously people have engaged with the training, and the whole point of that training is that council employees are the council's best fraud detection and prevention resource. They're the eyes and ears of your organisation. 2/3 of the cases we investigate here in New Zealand, it's an employee who's raised their hand to say there's something going on here that doesn't sit well with me. And so it's so important that you arm them with knowledge, but more importantly, the confidence to speak up, knowing that they're working for an organisation that will take their concerns seriously, will investigate them properly, will protect their anonymity if required, they won't face any repercussions. That kind of culture is so important, and so that's what the training does. The analytics is much more kind of a bottom-up piece of work, looking in great detail at transactions and at data, and I think it's encouraging. There's always really interesting, and management's still working through it, but prima facie, there was nothing in there that made us think there's anything really nasty going on. There's some interesting relationships I think the management wasn't aware about, and there's some interesting kind of transactional patterns, but nothing in there that would give us any real cause for concern. And then the third piece, which is that review of the policy and the fraud control plan, just really gives you some really good foundational documents that are there for all staff, that are leading practice, and that will cover all your bases in this area. And so, from in that document, just doing those three pieces of work is pushing those green sections out across at least 3 of those 4 quadrants and getting you up to that level of expected practice.
Thanks for that, David. Any comments, questions folk would like to raise? So this is really about work that's been done or is being done, which is really good in my view. Any comments from folk at this stage? No? Look, I can only put a big uptick on all of that stuff, Dave and Jason. I think it's actually really important. I'll be honest, as an independent chair, it always worries me a wee bit about something that we know is always a risk, but equally it's a bit hard to put your hand on unless you do the sort of work that Timaru's doing. So I'm very comfortable that we actually are doing it, and it'll certainly make life easier for us when we come to our external audit and have to sign off that we are implementing appropriate forward policies and plans, and I'm jumping one paper ahead of myself into play. So I actually just want to say thank you for the work to date. This is really important. Let's take a small give here, B. When David says, well, you've got to work through the analytics, but actually there's nothing there at this stage prima facie, I think it was the way you put it, first flush, that would worry us. That's good, because I have, to be honest, engaged David before in positions where in fact I wanted to do it because I had been worried. So it's a good sign, mate.
I'll just pass a comment, Mr. Chair, that Trudy, Jason and David will know as soon as it was done. Is there anything that I need to know? It was about 4:45 on a Friday night, and I said to Jason, I want to know before the weekend. So I too wanted to know exactly that. And while there is a bit for us to go and unpick, like you, it's something that literally keeps you awake at night, is the thought of something malfeasance going on inside the organisation.
Good. And I mean, other things start to come off that, what is our, possibly out of this, is what is our staff interest register like? Is it up to date? Do we monitor it? Do we understand how it could affect the payments? All those sorts of things. Yep.
Just on that, can I make a point that we are seeing some really responsible behaviour by officers who, for instance, have been given gifts, sometimes outside of the workplace, and they have brought it in and recorded it, and then it's been dealt with in terms of an appropriate practice policy, etc. So I think we should, and that's happening at all levels, so I think we should acknowledge that, and that's partly training and awareness as well. And I don't want to jinx anything, it's touch wood, an air, whatever, but it is heartening, and David's training is superb. To your point, Janice, I think the elected members, we should open it up, provide it, and invite them, because it is fascinating training and insights.
Yeah, thanks for that, Pete. I wanted to just endorse that we should open it up. I think this is one of those areas where, for elected members, it would be useful, Jason. So if I could ask you to work with Trudy to think through how that might be achieved and what the council program's like, I'll leave it in your hands. Okay, so the motion is that we receive and note. Do I have a mover and a seconder? Thanks, Peter. Do I have a seconder? Thank you, Scotty. Appreciate that. Any discussion on the motion? By the way, do I have to pass an additional motion that you'll have a... So you're actually adding the fact that you want one, okay? Rightio, so Jess, we're adding the fact that there'll be a... Well, because you're moving it, you want one as well. As you're taking it for the team, Peter.
Interesting thing we'll find that if you do find some form of fraud or corruption, finding a policeman to take the complaint and understanding it to investigate it that's the key. Very, very big hole in the...
Well, I think actually, can I be honest, comment on that, Peter? I think I think the key is actually what we're going to do after morning tea, which is look at the fraud detection or prevention and detection policy, because actually we have to look after ourselves. Is my experience, and then provide, well, working with the police, provide it to them. We are the controllers of our own destiny in this, rather than, oh, here's a fraud, Mr. Policeman, please look at it. And that's not even a crack at them, it's just the reality of resourcing. Yeah, okay. So with that, so it's now twofold. We ask management to arrange a briefing or one of David's great fraud awareness meetings for training for the councillors. I'll put that motion. All those in favour, please say aye. Those against? It's carried. Thanks a lot. Well, I'd like us to take a break now and come back at past. I hope, Dave, you can join us for morning tea. I think we're going to go through to the lounge, and we'll take a break for a quarter of an hour. Thank you.